She never planned on running a rundown motel in the middle of nowhere, but every creaky night and cold morning, Ellie held on. One room, one memory at a time. Until a stranger showed up, soaked by desert rain, with no name and no place to go. She gave him shelter, no questions asked. 1 week later, military vehicles rolled into her parking lot like ghosts from another life. What came next didn't just rescue her motel, it turned it into something unforgettable. This is the story of Desert Haven and how one act of kindness lit a spark that changed everything. Welcome to Taqnix, where true stories of quiet heroism live on. The storm lashed down Highway 89 like it had a grudge to settle, sheets of wind and rain smacking into whatever dared stand in its path. Desert Haven Motel, barely holding itself up, stood stubbornly in the way. Just south of Flagstaff, Arizona, tucked behind a broken gas pump and a rust-covered diner, sat 12 tired rooms. Their walls were chipped, their trim flaked with rust, and yet they stood, not proud, just present. Ellie Sanders owned them now. She leaned behind the check-in desk, arms crossed, eyes watching the front window like it might shatter any minute. The air smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. Her fingers tapped the countertop, not with nerves, just with weariness. The vacancy sign outside blinked off and on like it couldn't make up its mind. It hadn't seen a guest since Tuesday. Now it was Friday. Ellie was in her mid-40s, face sun-worn, hair tied in a low ponytail that hadn't changed in years. There was a kind of calm in her posture, like someone who'd faced too much to flinch anymore. She rarely smiled, but when she did, it meant something. Behind her, the small space doubled as her office and living area. It smelled lived in a quiet way. Her father, Sergeant Jack Sanders, USMC, had run the place before her. He died in the back room 2 years ago, surrounded by war medals and the hiss of an oxygen tank. Ellie stayed. She could have sold it, moved somewhere with real jobs and working plumbing. But Desert Haven wasn't just bricks and rooms. It was his legacy, but love didn't pay electricians, and pride didn't convince fire inspectors. 2 weeks ago, the fire marshal had dropped a warning on her desk: fire alarms, ancient, breaker box, dangerous, wiring in 5 rooms, a lawsuit waiting to happen. She had 10 days. 5 were already gone. She'd begged the bank twice. First they offered a smile. Then they didn't even bother pretending. She reached for her cold coffee, tired bones heavy in her chair. That's when the doorbell scraped. Not chimed, scraped. Metal against metal, like everything else in this forgotten place. She looked up. A man stood in the doorway. He was soaked through, boots wet, jacket clinging to him, a military-style green coat, darkened by the rain. No umbrella, no suitcase, just a threadbare backpack. His face was sharp but weathered, probably late 50s. He didn't say a word, just stood there dripping. His right arm hung close to his side, fingers half-curled like they hurt. "Sorry," he said, voice low and rough. Was walking. The rain hit hard. "You're lucky it didn't freeze you out there," Ellie replied. Should have kept going, but the shoulders flooded. Couldn't risk it. She glanced at the jacket, a faint eagle and anchor patch barely visible under the soaked fabric. She knew the shape. "Moraine?" she asked. "Used to be," he said. "Long time ago. Where you heading?" "North. Just passing." Her eyes moved to the key hooks behind her. All of them were still hanging. She reached behind the counter, took the key for room 5. It had the only working heater, and slid it across. "No charge," she said. "Shower takes a while to warm up. Towels are in the dresser." The man looked surprised, as if he wasn't used to hearing yes. "Thanks," he said quietly. "Name Ray." She didn't ask for a last name, and he didn't offer one. An hour later, Ellie stood outside room 5 with a folded blanket in her arms and a chipped mug filled with hot tea. Steam curled into the cold air. She knocked twice. Ray opened the door slowly. He'd changed into dry clothes, or at least ones that weren't dripping. His coat hung over the heater vent, steam lifting from its sleeves like breath. "I thought you could use this," Ellie said, handing him the mug and blanket. Ray blinked, surprised by the gesture. Still, he took both with quiet hands. "You didn't have to," he said softly. Ellie gave a small shrug. "My dad ran this place most of his life. Said when someone shows up tired and freezing, you don't ask a lot of questions. You just help." Ray gave the ghost of a smile. It didn't quite reach his eyes, but it was real. "Was he military too?" "Yeah, Vietnam, Marines." Ray nodded, the smile deepening just a little. "Sounds about right." Ellie's eyes drifted to the bed behind him. His bag sat neatly by the nightstand. Everything about him was in order. The way he moved, the way he placed things. Even in rest, he moved like someone still answering to orders. "If you need anything," she said, stepping back. Storm's not ending anytime soon. I've waited out worse, he replied. Something in his voice made her pause. She nodded once, then walked back into the rain. The door clicked closed behind her. That night, Desert Haven stayed dark. The rain didn't let up. Wind howled through the gutters. The office smelled like coffee and silence, and the kind of stories people stopped telling. In room 5. Ray sat on the bed, hands around the warm mug. Thunder rolled through the sky like memory, and for the first time in a long while, his chest didn't feel so heavy, not because the storm had passed, but because someone just once had let him in without making him explain. By sunrise, the skies had cleared, but the motel wore the storm like bruises. Rainwater puddled under the eaves. Gutters sagged. Room 3's ceiling had leaked straight through to the mattress. Ellie found it soaked and sagging. She muttered under her breath, dragging the wet thing out toward the dumpster. Then she heard footsteps. Ray. He didn't say anything, just grabbed the other side of the mattress like it was his job. Together they hauled it out and dropped it beside the trash. Ellie started to thank him, but he was already walking toward the shed. 10 minutes later he came back with a toolbox. The kind with old rusted hinges and half-missing wrenches. But he knew how to use them. By noon, the roof above room 3 was patched with old sheet metal Ellie didn't even remember storing. By 3 p.m., he'd rewired a busted outlet in room 8 and got the heater in the lobby blowing warm air again, not just dust. He didn't ask. He didn't even check in. He just fixed what needed fixing. His focus was calm, methodical, like every nail and wire had a reason. Ellie watched from the steps, coffee in hand. You ever sit down? She called. Ray looked up from the siding he was reattaching to the laundry room. Not unless I have to, Ellie smirked. Well, I'm in charge here and I'm ordering. You two take a break, he chuckled, wiped his hands, walked over with a subtle limp she hadn't noticed before. You always take in lost souls? He asked, leaning on the rail. Only the quiet ones that fix things, she replied. They sat in a silence that felt less empty and more peaceful. Ellie sipped her coffee. You ever talk about it? Ray's gaze stayed on the gravel, on the wind tugging old receipts through the lot, about where you served, what you saw. He was quiet for a long breath. Led a few teams, special ops. Most of it's buried in files no one reads. She nodded. My dad never talked, either, just said it was hell. And that coming back felt like trying to stand on a boat that wouldn't stop rocking. Ray looked at her, really looked. Were you close? Ellie's voice softened. I was. He loved this place. Said it gave him structure. Said the sound of the radiator at night reminded him he was still alive. Ray's eyes drifted toward room 6. Seems like something a Marine would say, yeah, but he never let this place fall apart. I'm not him, I'm just barely holding it together. You're doing more than that, Ray said quietly. Looked away, swallowed hard. Town's on my back. Fire code violations. Electrical issues. $5,000 in repairs. 0 in the bank. Ray didn't respond. He just nodded once. 3 more days slipped by. Ray didn't slow down. He got the old vending machine running again, the one that had eaten quarters since spring. He somehow coaxed the Wi-Fi back to life, too, though the signal still sputtered when the microwave ran. Each morning, Ellie would make breakfast. Simple stuff. Scrambled eggs, toast, some days pancakes, just like her dad used to make. Ray always ate quietly, politely. They never really talked about the future, but the silence between them had softened like old wood warmed by the sun. Until Thursday that morning. Ellie opened the front office and froze. An envelope was taped to the door, white stamped with the town's seal in the corner. She knew what it was before she opened it. Final notice. Inside the letter laid it out. Cold and clean, 10 days to meet safety, code 223C. Every room needed working smoke and carbon monoxide detectors. The fuse box had to be replaced. Inspections, certifications. No delay, no mercy. Failure meant immediate shutdown, no appeal. No more Desert Haven. She stood on the porch, the paper trembling in her hands. The morning light hadn't even touched the hills yet. Ray stepped out of the laundry room, grease on his hands, sleeves rolled up. He saw her face and stopped. She didn't say anything, just held out the letter. He read it, slow and silent. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. How bad? He asked. Ellie let out a breath, sharp and shaking. It's over, that's how bad. I can take another look at the wiring, he offered. She shook her head. It's not just wiring anymore. It's permits, licensed work, state certifications, thousands of dollars. I can't fix this with scrap tin and borrowed time. Ray handed the paper back. You could fight it, he said. Quiet. Ellie laughed, but it came out bitter. With what? Ray hope. Her voice cracked. I begged the bank. They shut me down. County. Same thing. Even the veterans business folks said they were out of grants. Everyone's been kind, but no one's helping. She dropped onto the bench outside the office. Her hands shook as she folded the letter back into its envelope. I stayed because of him, she said, because this place felt like the only part of my father that hadn't been buried. But maybe it's time to let go. Ray stood still, saying nothing. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back into room 5. The door closed softly behind him. By sunrise the next morning, Ray was gone. No noise, no toolbox rattling, no soft thump of boots on the porch. Ellie noticed the silence first. It felt ... wrong. She walked to room 5. The bed was made, the heater still running, but Ray was nowhere in sight. The key had been left on the desk. Next to it, a small piece of paper, torn from the guestbook, folded once. Her hands shook as she opened it. The message was short, written in all caps, neat and sharp. You did what others wouldn't. Now let's see what happens when we do the same. RNO. Last name, no address, no clue where he'd gone. Ellie read the words again. Then again, she didn't know what they meant. Didn't know if he was coming back. All she knew was that it hurt, more than it should have. Room 5 suddenly felt colder, emptier. The motel echoed with quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful anymore. It was hollow. Later that day she started boxing up the storage room, called a guy she knew to help appraise old furniture, began sorting her dad's records, medals, letters, the flag from his service. If Desert Haven had to go, she told herself, it would go down clean. Proud that evening, she swept the front steps, cleaned every window, even polished the old brass bell, even though no one had rung it in weeks, and she had no idea. She had just prepared the motel for the most important visitors it would ever receive. The sky was pale, almost colorless, like the world had stopped breathing. Inside room 2, Ellie was folding towels into boxes, her last task before letting go. For 2 days, she'd packed up memories, pulled faded linens from beds, unplugged ancient mini fridges. The walls felt bare now, hollow, like the place knew it was being left behind. Tomorrow was the deadline. After that, Desert Haven would be condemned, locked up, eventually sold, or worse, bulldozed into memory. Ellie had told herself she was ready, that she'd made peace with it, but somewhere deep, where the truth lived, something ached, a quiet ache without words. She sealed the last box with tired hands. Just as a sound broke the silence, not thunder, not wind. Engines. Low at first, then louder. Ellie frowned, walked through the empty lobby, pushed the front door open. And froze. Dust rolled across the gravel like fog. A military jeep pulled into the lot, then another, then a flatbed truck loaded with lumber and spools of cable, then more, one after another. Freshly painted vehicles rolled in with precision. 12, 15, maybe more. They lined up across the front like a well-rehearsed mission. Doors opened at once. Men and women stepped out, some in uniform, others in worn veteran caps, and a few in matching jackets with patches she didn't recognize. They moved with the same rhythm, quiet, efficient, practiced. One man unfolded a clipboard. Another rolled out a ladder. A pair unloaded fire extinguishers still wrapped in plastic. Ellie's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then the last jeep's door opened, and Ray stepped out. But he wasn't the same man who'd asked for a towel on a stormy night. Now he stood, tall in full dress uniform. The medals on his chest gleamed under the overcast sky. His posture was sharp, controlled. Across his nameplate it read, KOR, Dalton, USMC Ret. He walked toward her with purpose, boots crunching the gravel. When he reached her, he removed his cap, held it over his heart. Miss Sanders, he said, voice calm, steady, permission to assist. Ellie's throat closed. She couldn't speak. Ray's face softened. I heard, your motel has a fire code issue, he continued. My team and I have experience with difficult logistics. Still, she said nothing. Couldn't. Behind him, 2 men were already unloading coils of wire. Others carried ladders, toolboxes. Sealant. Ellie found her voice at last. Ray, what is this? He stepped closer. After I left, I made a few calls, he said. Men I served with, people I helped, foundations that support veteran recovery. But this time, we're not rebuilding for us. He looked at the peeling paint. Behind her, we're rebuilding for you. Ellie felt the words hit like wind through an open door. Ray gestured behind him. They're volunteers, he said. Some active duty, some retired. One was a fire marshal before he enlisted. Another does trauma space design for vets with PTSD. They're not here for money. He looked her dead in the eye. They're here because you saw me. When no one else did, you opened a door. His voice dropped slightly, and I told them it was time we returned that dignity. Ellie's hands trembled. But I didn't do anything, she whispered. Ray smiled gently. That's exactly why it mattered. The next hour moved like a dream. Ladders leaned against walls. Workers moved with purpose. A brand new breaker box was wheeled into the utility room. Smoke detectors lined the desk like soldiers awaiting orders. Ellie stood to the side, dazed. A young woman in a grey beanie walked up, holding a tablet. Ma'am, I'm Willa. I served under Colonel Dalton during his last tour. Afghanistan, Ellie blinked. He never told me he was, Willa smiled. He wouldn't, but when he put out the call, no one hesitated. He said, and I quote, she saw me. When I was invisible, we owe her. Ellie felt the tears sting. She turned away, just in time to see two older vets reattaching the Desert Haven sign to a brand new post. One had a prosthetic, the other wore an old Navy cap and hummed quietly as he worked. She pressed a hand to her mouth. The courtyard, once silent, was now alive, not just with tools and repairs, but with redemption. That afternoon, Ray stood beside her near room 5. Electricians were finishing up the last panel. You don't have to say anything, he said gently. Ellie turned to him, eyes wet. You came back. I never really left. She gave a shaky laugh. This isn't real, I'm dreaming. Ray looked at the work being done, the trucks, the team. No, he said, this is what it looks like when service comes full circle. Nearby, someone had just set down a plaque beside the entrance. Brass, clean, polished. Desert Haven for those who served, and the ones who remember. Ellie reached for Ray's arm, not out of fear, but because this time, the motel wasn't just saved. It had been reborn. 2 weeks later, Desert Haven didn't just look new, it felt different. Like something had shifted underneath the paint, the wiring, the walls. Something deeper. The siding was now a soft, desert beige with clean green trim that shimmered. In the morning light, a polished brass sign stood proudly at the entrance beside a flagpole Ray and his team had planted with their own hands. It read, Desert Haven Veteran Rest and Retreat founded on gratitude. Ellie stood beside it that morning, jacket zipped against the breeze, hands tucked in her pockets. She stared at the words, still unsure if it was all real. 4 of the rooms had been completely redone, soundproofed, gently lit, outfitted with memory foam beds and blackout curtains. The kind of spaces where a person could finally sleep without jumping at every sudden noise. Room 6 now had a therapy dog kennel outside. Room 7 had become a quiet reading space filled with donated paperbacks and handwritten journals. Room 10, once storage for broken vending machines, now held a massage chair and a fancy coffee maker with more buttons than Ellie could figure out. People started arriving. First, it was a retired Marine and his wife, stopping on their way to California. Then a Vietnam vet from Prescott said he'd heard about the place from an old buddy who never talks about anything. Then came a Gulf War medic who hadn't slept through a single night in 15 years, but did hear. Ellie still worked the front desk, like always, but now there were volunteers. Veterans dropped by on weekends to mow the lawn, repaint the fences, offer repairs in exchange for nothing but coffee and a warm breakfast. Every now and then, at dusk, she'd step out and see someone new. A young man sitting by the fire pit in silence, an older woman stepping out of the chapel shed, wiping her eyes. It wasn't fancy, but it was sacred. A month after the convoy arrived, a letter came for Ellie, government seal, formal language, inside an invitation, the National Veterans Transition Conference. A panel featuring civilian-led veteran support efforts. At the bottom, we respectfully invite Ms. Ellie Sanders, Director of Desert Haven Veteran Retreat, to speak as a featured guest. She stared at it for what felt like hours, disbelieving. Ray found her at the front counter, fingers tight around the paper. You gonna go? He asked. She shook her head slowly. I'm not a speaker. I run a motel. Ray didn't argue. He just gave her that quiet, steady look, the kind that didn't push, just waited. You don't run a motel, he said. You run a home, and you don't need to give a speech. Just tell the truth. She went, wore her best jeans, pinned her father's old Marine Corps insignia to her lapel. When her name was called, Ellie walked to the mic, hands shaking just slightly, voice steady. I didn't rebuild Desert Haven to change the world, she began. I kept it open because my dad believed in places like this. Quiet places, safe ones, where no one has to explain why they can't sleep or why they flinch at sudden sounds. She paused. looked at the room. I didn't plan to be part of something bigger. I just opened a door. Someone walked through, and then he brought the rest of them with him. When she stepped back, the applause came too loud for her comfort, but maybe just loud enough for the story. Back home, life settled into a rhythm that felt almost holy. Breakfast at 7, coffee brewing by 6:30. Evenings spent around the fire pit, quiet voices sharing stories, or just sitting in peace. Ellie kept a notebook now. She didn't call it a journal, just improvement notes. She'd say but inside, she wrote names, moments, the woman who left behind her purple heart in a handkerchief. "It's a thank you," she said. The teenage boy who brought his father a vet with brain trauma and whispered, he finally smiled here. People came, people stayed, and somehow without fanfare or headlines, people healed. One night, the desert air was calm, the kind of Arizona stillness that holds warmth just long enough to feel like memory. Ellie sat on the front steps, a blanket across her lap, chamomile tea in a chipped mug. Most rooms were full, lights glowing gently behind curtains. Peace, she thought, looked a lot like this. Ray appeared from the side path, holding a second mug. "Thought you might want a refill," he said. She smiled, scooted over. "You always bring the good stuff." He sat beside her with quiet ease, the kind of comfort that didn't need explanation. They watched the lights together. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Ray finally broke the silence. "I've been to a lot of places, Ellie. Conflict zones, camps, bases where sleep came in minutes and left just as fast. But I've never known peace like this." She turned to look at him. His face, still weathered by service, had softened. Something inside him had finally settled. Ellie's eyes drifted to the quiet motel behind them. "Maybe it's because here," she whispered. They remembered. Ray nodded, and then they sat in silence, because they didn't need to say anything else. Sometimes, the deepest gratitude doesn't come in words. Sometimes, the strongest homes are built on kindness. And sometimes, all it takes is one open door. Sometimes, the strongest homes aren't made of brick and wood. They're built with patience, dignity, and a door left open on a stormy night. Desert Haven was never just a motel. It became a place where silence could heal, where forgotten warriors were remembered, not with medals or speeches, but with hot coffee, warm light, and a room that felt safe. Ray didn't come for rescue, but he left behind a revolution of kindness. And Ellie, she didn't ask for help. She simply saw someone who needed it. There was enough to change everything, because in a world that often looks away, one small act of humanity can echo forever. Is what we believe in at Taqnix, where stories of quiet strength, justice, and real redemption are never forgotten. If this story touched something in you, subscribe to Taqnix, and remember, sometimes all it takes is one open door to let the light back in.